Hello, friends. Welcome to my home. You see back here my jacket and a container of things and some other stuff. I don't know. I haven't been home in 2 months, so I don't really know what's going on back there. But I'm sitting right now in the parking lot of Our Lady of Victory Basilica in Buffalo-ish, New York, which is the home of Father Nelson Baker, who I have just been starting to get to know. He seems like a remarkable man. He's venerable, declared venerable. He was 19th century baptized as a Lutheran, actually, as a baby, even though his mother was apparently a very devout Catholic. He wasn't baptized Catholic until he was 10. It does seem that he was rebaptized, which I guess was the way that they did things back then because we weren't super sure about other people's baptism. Now, if you're baptized in water in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, you're good to go. He fought in the Civil War for the North and then eventually entered seminary. He was an excellent businessman, and so they sent him to this home for orphan boys, and he ended up just transforming everything. He got, the place was like $60,000 in debt, which at the time might have as well have been 60 million. Got them out of debt, started a home for children, unwed mothers, for older boys who were trying to get work, for older women. He did a lot of ministry with African Americans. People were very interested in the faith, but there was a lot of racism, of course, at the time. By this point, it was the early 20th century, and he had 30 people come to him asking for instruction in the faith. By like 6 months later, I think he had 500. So he did some incredible work and really started a lot of programming that still exists to some degree to this day. During the first few years of the Depression, he fed 450,000 people. He just seems to have been a really incredible man. So it was a blessing to be here today. It was a very Irish Mass with lots of green and flags and shamrocks and some four-leaf clovers, which is not the same thing, right? Because a four-leaf clover is a symbol of good luck, but has nothing to do with the Trinity, which is the whole point of St. Patrick and the shamrock. I was accidentally wearing orange, so I kept my sweater on the whole time because I did not want anybody to think that I was making a statement about Ireland or about St. Patrick or anything. For those of you who don't know, green is sort of the Catholic color, orange is sort of the Protestant color. Green is the Irish color, orange is sort of the English color, so, don't want to make any trouble. I'm just here because I love Jesus. But the readings today are particularly appropriate. Now, I had to go and sort of do a double take, first of all, because the first reading that I had is not the same as the first reading that the bishops give us for today, but okay. Maybe it's a feast day in this diocese, I don't really know. But I wanted to look and see if the reading that I found online is the St. Patrick reading or the reading for Friday of the second week of Lent, because it's an interesting one. It's Genesis 37, right? I just recently discovered that you guys are seeing backwards, so every time I hold up my Bible, you see, like, El Bibilo, so I'm assuming you know what's going on. It's the reading about Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, that guy, from the book of Genesis, telling us about his being sold into slavery. Now, if you know anything about St. Patrick, you know why this is striking, because that's St. Patrick's story. We tend to think of him as like, Patrick, he drove the snakes out of Ireland, invented beer and the color green, something like that. But really what's interesting about him is that he was a British guy, maybe English, maybe Welsh, we're not exactly sure. Definitely Roman, like really it seems more Roman than he was much of anything else. And he was kidnapped when he was a teenager, and he was sold into slavery in Ireland. And he worked as a shepherd in Ireland, and he wasn't much of a Christian before. He was baptized. His father was a deacon, maybe, grandfather was a priest, something like that. But he didn't know the Lord in any kind of a personal way until he was living in slavery, and he began to realize just the way that God sustains us and the need that he had for a relationship with God. And so he became a very prayerful man. Eventually he escaped from slavery and he made his way back home, but he felt that he was being called to serve the Irish people. And, this is like, go back to the people who captured you, the people who enslaved you, the people who tormented you. And it doesn't seem that they were like particularly vicious captors, but to take away someone's freedom, that's a pretty serious offense. But he had a dream of the Irish people saying, come back to us, we need you. And he felt the Lord was really reminding him of this passage, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. And it was something that he really couldn't ignore. And so he ended up going back to the Irish people, preaching the gospel, becoming the patron saint of Ireland, and one of really the great Irish figures of all time. Similar, really, to the experience that Joseph has. Now, Joseph's brothers are the ones who sold him into slavery. These aren't strangers who are his captors. This is his family. You know, and he was a little bit smarmy and, like, probably needed a little bit of some comeuppance, yeah? But not being sold into slavery, okay? If your little brother's a brat, you don't sell him into slavery. Just, like, rule of thumb for life. Joseph is sold into slavery, and he has every right to be bitter. He has every right to be bitter. I mean, anybody really does, but particularly someone to whom the gospel has not been preached, someone who doesn't know Jesus, who's never been told, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. Joseph really ought to be bitter and resentful for his whole life, and we don't get that part of the story today. We just see him being thrown into the pit and then pulled out of the pit for the good of those who have hurt him. Do you see a little bit of foreshadowing here? You see a little bit of foreshadowing, like Jesus, who's killed and buried and then rises forth from the tomb in order to do good to those who have killed him. But later on in the book of Genesis, we're going to see Joseph talking to his brothers, you know, and there's a famine that comes. Joseph has risen to power in Egypt, and the brothers come. They don't recognize him. And they ask him for food, and, you know, eventually he reveals himself to them. This is the very short version. You could read it in the book of Genesis. And he says, I am your brother Joseph. This is Genesis 45, verse 4. I am your brother Joseph, whom you once sold into Egypt. But now do not be distressed, and do not reproach yourselves for having sold me here. It was really for the sake of saving lives that God sent me here ahead of you. I mean, what an incredible man to be able to look at these people who have tortured him, or, you know, by means of what they did so many years before, who have made him suffer so incredibly much. And he says, no, don't worry. Don't worry, because God was working. God was working. How beautiful is that? Something that many of us, I think, really need to find as encouragement in the life of St. Patrick, in the life of Joseph, to be able to look at our past life and say, you know what, I suffered, and that was ugly, and that was not okay, but God was working. So I want to challenge you guys. You know, we've got a similar thing in the gospel, this spirit of forgiveness. The gospel is Matthew 21, 33 to 43. It's the parable of the tenants, the one where we've got the workers in the vineyard who kill every representative of the owner, and finally they kill his son. And Jesus says, what will the owner of the vineyard do to those tenants when he comes? And the answer is, he will put those wretched men to a wretched death. And Jesus doesn't say, yeah, you're right, vengeance and anger. He just says, well, he's gonna give the vineyard to someone else. We know the vineyard of the Lord is the house of Israel. And so he's talking about the kingdom being opened to Gentiles. But he doesn't say he's going to kill them. He doesn't say he's going to punish them. He doesn't say he's going to do terrible things to them. He says just that it's going to be given to another people. But, you know, we who read afterwards, we know that Jesus is saying it's not about death and it's not about vengeance. There's going to be mercy, and there's going to be healing, and there's going to be forgiveness. And so we who walk in the heritage of Joseph and of our Lord Jesus and of St. Patrick and of so many saints, St. Josephine Bakhita particularly comes to mind, who was kidnapped, sold into slavery, and came to know Jesus through the series of events that followed. At the end of her life, she said, if I met my captors today, I would kneel at their feet and I would kiss their feet, because it was through what they did that I came to know Jesus Christ. We need to be able to look at our lives and say, this is evil. What happened to me was evil. Being sold into slavery, being abused, being assaulted, being betrayed, all of those things, those are evil. And yet, God is able to work even through that evil. Lord, give me the grace to love and forgive and to find gratitude for the way that you have worked in my life, even in that ugliness. Now, my computer is doing some funny, sketchy things and has been for a long time, so I'm going to cross my fingers that it has in fact been recording all of these brilliant things that I've been saying to you. and we are going to call it a day. I hope that you are having a beautiful St. Patrick's Day, that while you may be celebrating, you're also keeping some sort of penance, because it is a Friday in Lent, unless it's a solemnity in your diocese. And I will pray that the Lord is doing beautiful things in your life today, friends. Thanks. God bless.